Tonight on Insights on PBS Hawaii, the mass shootings at Sandy Hook Elementary has renewed the debate over one of the most controversial issues confronting our nation: gun control laws. Now, live in our studio, our host, Dan Boylan.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Dan Boylan. A renewed public outcry for tougher firearms restrictions across the nation gained traction last week when President Obama issued his 23 executive orders to help address gun violence. As lawmakers on Capitol Hill consider gun control measures this session, the debate has revealed a stark divide. Supporters of tougher gun laws point out that our nation has the highest per capita rate of firearms-related murders of the developed countries. Gun rights advocates, on the other hand, view stricter gun legislation as an erosion of our individual liberties. How will our nation find common ground to help prevent other tragedies like those at Sandy Hook Elementary, Virginia Tech, and Aurora? Should the glorification of violence by the entertainment industry share part of the blame for the escalating gun violence? Does the Second Amendment protect our use of high-capacity ammunition clips that kill dozens in seconds? And are there effective background checks in place to keep dangerous weapons out of the hands of those suffering from mental illness? Tonight on Insights, we have a panel comprised of supporters of more restrictive gun laws and those who feel that imposing tougher regulations infringes on our constitutional rights. You can join our conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. The contact information you now see on your screen will be repeated throughout the program. Insights is also available live on your computer screen at pbshawaii.org. As always, the video will also be posted online after tonight's program. Now to our panel. Harvey Gerwig is the president of the Hawaii Rifle Association. The nonprofit HRA is the state affiliate for the National Rifle Association. Harvey is involved in firearms training for persons wishing to acquire a handgun in Hawaii and firearms safety training for the Boy Scouts of America. He is the owner of Pacific Dynamics Corporation, a general contracting firm. Peter Carlisle, a person we've often seen at this table in recent years, is the former mayor of Honolulu and was elected to 4 terms as the prosecuting attorney for the city and county of Honolulu. He served 14 years as prosecutor before running for mayor. He is now an attorney in private practice. Richard Holcomb is a criminal defense and personal injury lawyer. He currently represents a client who has filed a lawsuit against the city and county of Honolulu. The complaint alleges that Hawaii's license to carry statute and various other firearm regulations are unconstitutional. We'll hear more about that later in the program. Dick Kappenberg is a clinical and forensic psychologist in private practice. He is the former chief psychologist at the Rehab Hospital of the Pacific and the clinical director of their brain injury program. He is also the forensic psychologist for the State Department of Health's Courts and Corrections team. Dr. Kappenberg has also conducted numerous violence risk assessments for the court system in Hawaii, as well as for private businesses and government agencies. The massacre, I guess that's the only thing we can call it, of elementary school children in Connecticut left an awful lot of people shaken, certainly about guns and the safety of kids in schools and the safety of everybody everywhere. The president's come forth with a program that Vice President Biden has brought together. What are some of from your perspectives, what are some of your initial responses to those suggestions for legislation and for executive orders? And what do you think will happen to them, and where do you think they should go? What looks good to you? What looks bad to you? Where?
Well, you know, you sort of think that there's automatically going to be a knee-jerk reaction to something like this, and it's either going to go too far or it's going to go not strongly enough in some people's opinions, and then that's going to be the end of it. And this really doesn't seem to have that feel about it. It seems like they are genuinely committed now to be doing something significant about the issue. And I think that there is very much a public outcry because of this tragedy and the loss of so many innocent lives, that something probably is going to be done for once. And I applaud it. I think it's about time we took a look at just what we allow people to have in their garages, in their homes, and does that make us a really safer community or a more dangerous one?
Well, Harvey?
The Hawaii Rifle Association and the NRA are categorically opposed to gun bans. Gun bans historically have not done anything to lessen crime. According to John Lott's book, More Guns, Less Crime, the more guns there are in the community, the less crime there is. And the founding fathers of this country came up with the Second Amendment for several reasons. One, to allow the people to always protect themselves against people that would be there to hurt them. And secondly, to prevent tyranny of the government that is running the country. Our founding fathers came from a very tyrannical situation in England and decided that America was not going to be subject to that kind of tyranny.
Harvey, but what about some of the other aspects that the president talked about? A significantly better background check system that would have more material in it, that would cover private sales and so forth. How do you feel? Is there a position? Does the NRA have a position on that?
Yeah, locally we have a system that basically does all that. When you go to buy a firearm in Hawaii, you get 2 levels of background check. You get a background check with your personal physician, and you get a background check through the health department, which checks through all the state systems to find out if you have any mental issues. So your doctor is sent a form from the police department that asks specifically, do you have any issues in your medical history that should disallow you from having a firearm? It's a pretty solid background check.
Do you think that should be extended nationally?
I don't know. I don't know that the checks here have really prevented any issues. I don't really know that this system solves anything or prevents any of the type of issues that we saw at Sandy Hook.
Any thoughts on this?
Or moreover, what I would add is if we did more, there is no nexus between a reduction in crime and us doing further background checks or us banning this certain class of weapon and so forth and so on.
But if I'm not mistaken, currently, I want to talk about the background checks for a moment, because as I understand it, there's a belief there's some possibility that part of this whole thing can pass, that the gun bans are unlikely to pass, that politically, at least right away, they're not going to pass, but that the background checks need, I guess the Organization of Mayors certainly is behind that. They'd like to see more of it. But is there a possibility that if there were a national system that we couldn't lower at least the number of people who are unfit?
Well, I don't know if that's true, and perhaps from a psychiatric viewpoint is what you should look at. But it's my understanding that, and I'm cheating because I heard him say out in the lobby, but it's my understanding that there is that these rampage type killers are very unique. There has been very little study done, and then it's very difficult to diagnose them. So we do a background check. Yeah, this guy is a perfectly normal, law-abiding citizen, and then something snaps and he goes crazy. So I don't see how the background checks would work. And I would also point out that the gun control that we currently have doesn't seem to be working. And I'll give you a prime example is the gun-free school zone. You know, this kid just killed his mom. He didn't care if he was in a gun-free school zone. And I believe that more than a tyrannical government, and perhaps it ties in with self-defense, is by the time the 14th Amendment was passed, the core protection that was ratified through the 14th Amendment was that of self-defense as it relates to the Second Amendment. So what we are doing is we are passing more laws. The criminals are violating the laws that exist, and the result is that the law-abiding citizen is left unable to protect himself.
Well, if I would make one suggestion, I don't think that we know enough information to have the ability to say this is what we need to do to affect whatever it is we're looking at. And I say whatever it is because I'm not sure what we're looking at even in our discussion. Are we looking at Sandy Hook and how do we stop that? Are we looking at murders and suicides? Are we looking at violence in general? What's the question we're trying to answer? We don't have the database. John Lott has done some work on that. And some
John
of that
Lott is a professor in Illinois, right? Am I not mistaken?
he used to be.
Where is he now?
He is essentially with Fox News at this point. But what we have is an absence of data, and without data, we don't know what's going to work and what isn't. So if I were to look at the registry issue, I would say I think we should support it, because what it's going to give us is knowledge about who has guns and how many guns are out there. We have no real clear idea of how many guns are out there at this point.
But how does that help anything?
Because when something happens, then we can at least go with the database and say, okay, is this going to give us information about this person? Is this going to give us information about this community or this group? It is not looking at it in either a positive or a negative way. It's just saying, let's find out what works. Yeah, the issue about do more guns produce less violence? It's a mixed bag right now. We can't say. So neither side can use the information that we've got clearly and say, oh, this is the way we should go. Yeah, there are studies that say it does reduce it. But there are other studies that say it is indeterminate or it actually goes in the opposite direction. Let's find out what the answer is. And then if it's that, let's go with that. If you take something like suicide, suicide with weapons such as a gun is pretty much guaranteed. 90% of attempted suicides succeed with a gun. Should that mean that we should ban guns? No. There are other options that are very acceptable. You can work with the individual to say, hey, listen, I know you're really stressed out, or I know you're depressed, or I know you. Let's have you give your guns to your friend, your family, whomever, and get them out of the house. We know that when we can remove that, the chances are they're not going to, during the time of their depression or whatever emotional experiences, they're not going to use the gun, and if they don't use the gun, they're probably, in all probability, not going to choose another method. That doesn't mean gun control in the sense that it's usually used. Rather, what it means is that we control the use of the guns in an effective way that doesn't prevent something that doesn't need to be prevented.
Dick, in the Sandy Hook case, one of the things that bothered me was that this young man, Lanza's mother had, what was it, 3 or 5 automatic weapons in her, semi-automatic weapons in her home. Took this young, disturbed man to shooting classes and out to shooting ranges. And that just seemed to me like, you know, that's like having gasoline close to a fire, to have a kid in that condition, who she apparently told friends, I'm losing him, he's not, he's losing. Is it in fact possible that the mental health community, if we had sufficient funds and if we were more, could in fact deal with a situation like that and say to this woman, maybe you should get rid of your guns, or they shouldn't be in the same house with him? Or
may I add to that question as well? And I appreciate the scientific value, perhaps, if we did have this database, but I'm wondering, could we not reach the same goal through forensic studies? We know all kinds of things about Adam Lanza. He never filled out any papers that we have or have put into a database. And so you go back and you look at the people evicted or affected, and can't you make the same determinations just studying those folks as if everyone, or the same value to the scientific study as if you required everyone who wished to own a firearm to register with the federal government?
Well, number one, we know that the number of people who are actually apprehended for a particular crime is much less than 100%. so we're losing out on a group there. The more data that we've got on the guns that were used, the guns that are available, the more chance we have of making determinations about perhaps the crime that was committed there. I don't know that for sure. You are the attorneys and you can give a much better answer to that. But the more that we are able to look at are certain groups that we didn't know about having more problems that would be approached by other means. And it may not mean exclusion from the group that can have weapons. It may just mean that they need to have certain restrictions. I don't know, because I don't have enough of a database of how many guns are actually out there, just to start.
65 million would be a very modest number.
That's about the lowest that I've heard, and I've heard people say up to 310 million. Now, even the number of guns doesn't necessarily conclude anything, because if you look at other nations, if you look at Switzerland, if you look at Israel, just about everybody has guns because they're part of the military. And they have guns at home. Now, the distinction that is made is that in America, those are privately owned, and in the other countries, they're, quote, government owned. But they're still in the home, and the guns are right there.
With very little problem.
Yeah, with very little problem. So again, the clean-cut idea that more guns mean more trouble doesn't show across countries. But does it say something in America? Yeah, because we do have, some more murders, and that is definite. Is it because we're more violent? No. If you look at our violence statistics and compare them with other countries, violence in terms of crimes of rape, crimes of robbery, armed robbery, there's no difference.
I would beg to differ.
Okay.
If you were to take England, for instance, their violent crime rate is at least 3 times that of America, and they have no guns. But it's 3 times the rate of America.
Yeah.
What do you mean by, how are you defining violent crime?
The same thing that Dick was talking about, rape, violent attack, assault, those sort of crimes. Theirs are 3 times what ours are, and they have no guns.
And
so look at the correlation. If I'm a criminal and I want to commit violent crime on somebody, am I going to pick somebody who's armed? Not likely. Am I going to pick somebody who's unarmed? Very likely. So in the areas that have concealed carry, for instance, in America, very little of that type of crime. Because a criminal has to decide, am I going to attack somebody that can shoot me? Not likely.
As someone in law enforcement,
do you
want concealed carry?
No, of course not. And that's just so completely wrong on so many different issues. If you sit there and you're in one of these gang areas, everybody's armed. And are they looking for somebody who's armed when they're going out? Of course they are, because they're confronting the other people on their turf. So what do you have? You have people in a very congested area blowing away at each other from both sides with guns, preferably now one of the more exciting ones that has lots of clips and lots of guns and lots of bullets and maybe even automatic, which they can get their hands on. And what do you have? You have bystanders in the same area. And they're the ones who are going to get hit, as well as the other people who are shooting at each other. So to sit there and say that, that they're not going to go out and look for somebody with guns, the gang people do it all the time. People who are gang criminals do it all the time. It's something that they do. The drug industry, they do at the same time. How can you possibly say that? No, we're talking about exactly the same thing.
No, we're not. I'm talking about civilians, not gang members.
So what?
I'm talking about civilians, not gang members.
Civilians are affected by gang members. And with gang members armed to the teeth, they're a danger to everybody. And you're sitting there saying, let's give them whatever guns that they want because they, they don't have a record or they're acceptable. That's fine. Uesugi had guns coming out of his ears. We knew tons about his mental history. Did anybody have the good sense to take the guns away from him? Not a soul, because we didn't have the laws to do it. So why are you sitting there and saying that, once you've got guns, everything's going to be safer? And in England, if you take a look at the crime rates, they've advanced more recently. That's not something that's been traditionally true. It hasn't always been above the United States. That's only recently. So all they're doing is catching up to us.
And when did that transition start? When they got rid of guns?
No, it started about 30 years ago when they started having these hooligan and other problems like that. They had, again, it was a gang culture. But why not take a look at our own back door? Do we have huge gun problems here in Honolulu, Hawaii? No. Is it a relatively safe place? Yes. And by the way, just exactly how many people, the tyranny of government, are deathly afraid of Obama knocking on his door and coming in? How many people are deathly afraid of police officers coming in? Every single community wants one thing in their community for safety, and that's more police officers. That's true throughout the entire island of Oahu. They're not deathly afraid of, oh, we're going to have those guys come breaking into our house. They're the ones who are going to keep people from breaking into their house. So all this idea of tyranny of government, I don't get it.
The police are there to protect us.
Of course.
Really?
Yes.
And are they legally mandated to protect us?
Yes.
No, they're not.
Really?
Really.
How would you describe legally required to?
So if I get attacked in my home and I call 911 and the police don't show up in time and I'm injured, can I sue?
Of course not.
Why?
Because you have been the victim of a criminal act. The police don't control that criminal act. That's done independently of the police officer.
But they're there to protect me, right?
That's exactly correct. So are you saying that every time the violent act goes on by anybody and the police don't succeed in stopping it, that they should be sued?
I'm not saying
that sounds exactly what you're saying.
I asked you, are they there to protect us? And you said yes.
Of course
they can't protect us all. If there's
you're talking about the pragmatic, but I thought you were talking about legal forms. You're saying pragmatically they can't be in here. How's that legal? What does that have to do with a legal duty? They have a duty to serve and protect. They've taken an oath to do that.
That's right.
Do the police have guns?
Yes.
Why?
The police have guns because they're trained professionals who can step in and use them under appropriate circumstances when they are protecting civilians.
Or themselves.
And they are highly trained, by the way.
Or themselves.
Highly trained, and they are also highly screened in terms of their psychological background and what they've done. So they have all of those things.
So should a qualified, highly trained civilian have less rights than the police to protect themselves?
How many people actually have that type of training that the police have?
Well,
can you tell me how many do?
Okay. I've got a good answer for you. None in Honolulu. Why? Because they don't have the training, because they don't issue conceal and carry permits.
Do you have any idea how long it takes to get a police officer to be a police officer? And how much supervision there is of him all the time?
How much of the police
partners
academy?
There, they have superiors, they have all of those people. Are you telling me that you can build a civilian like that?
I'm telling you that a civilian that is trained properly and that has appropriate background screening.
I thought the question was, are civilians capable of behaving just the same as police officers? And I'm telling you the level of training that they have costs tens of thousands of dollars and requires a long investment and requires slow but steady increases through the ranks. That's not going to be a police officer.
But you would agree with me that in the police academy they learn a whole lot more than about guns.
Of course they do.
Right? Okay. So the gun training that a police cadet goes through, a civilian could go through it even at their own cost. And if they are qualified and pass the same background checks, why would they have any less right to protect themselves than a police officer?
Because they do not have the same, well, first off, police officers are given a duty to respond, and they do not have, every civilian has the right to retreat. They can do that on their own.
From your own house?
The police officers, you can retreat from anywhere, okay?
Out of my 15-story apartment with one door, retreat out into the void?
Well, you might be in those circumstances. You may not have a way to get out, but you could certainly go and lock yourself in somewhere. But if somebody has a gun, they're going to be able to get in there and get you.
Absolutely.
So,
and I would like to have a gun
yes.
to keep them from doing
That's completely true. Okay, in those that circumstances, most people who live either in offices or other have access to get out of it in some way or another. We all do because it's required by fire protection codes.
Could I interject, Richard? Because that's another one of the questions that bother me. The shooting at the theater. If you went with the idea of a carry law, so that everybody in the theater or a goodly percentage of them were packing a gun somewhere, and this guy comes in and starts shooting. And there were there 80, 100 people. It was the opening night. Maybe the whole thing was full of people. And suddenly people are pulling out their guns and firing at this guy. The bloodbath that would take place would be even greater than the situation with the guy coming in by himself and firing at him, and they're running for the doors.
How do you come to that conclusion?
Well, okay. Maybe all of these people who pull out their guns are trained people and who are carrying.
They should be.
But then it's the Wild West, Richard, isn't it? Doesn't that say that we must live our lives then as though it's the Wild West, and we're all just walking down high noon against the bad guys, and everybody's a potential bad guy? Is that isn't the whole carry law based on that? If we've got only 3.2 gun things here in Hawaii per 100,000, lowest in the nation, 10% of the people here who own guns, and there seems to be a correlation between the two. I think. I mean, I have to. I'm not a mathematician, but it seems to be a correlation. Then why would it make sense to encourage the carrying of weapons by people in the streets when we seem, by not having a lot of weapons, to have gotten there?
Well, I think it's, in my opinion, the analysis that you've speculated as to what would have happened had there been qualified people that were properly trained that carried firearms, I don't think it would have been a bloodbath. What I think is much more frightening is to have some lunatic come into a public area, such as a school, such as a movie theater, and start blasting people like fish in a barrel, and there's no one there to protect them. I mean, you have no recourse against a gun.
Yeah, and it really is a difficult situation because you certainly want to have some recourse, but the statistics on shootings by New York City police officers in the line of duty indicate that of the total bullets that they shoot, about 18% actually hit the victim, the perpetrator in that case.
i.e. New York within the last 12 months.
Okay, and the difficulty is, where do those other bullets go? Now, as Dan was saying, in terms of the movie theater incident, yeah, that scares the hell out of me. To think of my being in the movie theater, now I not only have the one person with the gun who's spraying everybody, but I've got other people potentially who aren't as well trained and who are going to be using it. What's the alternative? I don't know. I'm not saying that we shouldn't look for a solution, but I'm saying that the solutions we've got so far aren't ideal by far. We need to, I think, look deeper and not get split into two camps with each of us presenting only solutions. We need to be looking at what the causes are, what the problems are, and then what the solutions are. Not coming and saying, okay, this is the solution and we're going to do it, and then the other side just says, no, I don't like that solution, and then they just go head to head.
I think I listened to two speeches this past week, one by Obama and one by Abercrombie. They both warned against absolutists. So I am determined not to be an absolutist tonight. But I want to, Don and Kunia wants to know, who on the panel owns a firearm? Well, you and I don't. 3 of them do, 3 of 5. Why did you feel you had to get a firearm?
Well, this one is the last one I've owned. Right. I was raised with guns. My father was a marksman. He worked with us from the time literally we were 5 years of age. I had up to 5 or 6 guns at any one time. The one that I have now is actually my grandfather's, and it's an antique. In that sense, it was from 1899. So.
All of mine came from my father's experiences in World War II as a warrant officer in. He left them to the family, and so I got stuck with them. And so I was the one who had access to places to keep it where it was safe. So it's there, it's safe, hasn't been used for years and years.
I'm afraid to ask Harvey how many he's got. Harvey, how many?
If you were to ask me, I wouldn't answer. But I will tell you that I was brought up...
More than one, within 5 and 10?
Probably more than one.
Okay, thanks.
I was brought up in Southern California on a ranch where guns... You know, everybody had guns. There was absolutely no problems. If I got a gun for Christmas as a kid, even as a 4th grader, I'd proudly take it to school and show and tell it to everybody in school. I got a new gun and I'm target practicing or whatever with it. I'm a gun collector. I appreciate guns for their mechanical abilities and the genius of John Browning, for instance, in being able to create a mechanism like that. And I appreciate them for the fact that I can defend my family and myself with them.
Am I correct in understanding that you used to take a gun to show to other 4th graders at their school?
That is correct.
Okay.
How does each panel member interpret the Second Amendment? That is, protect ourselves or just for hunting, fishing, and target practice? What do you...
The Supreme Court's already interpreted it for us, and it's all of the above. And in Heller, the landmark decision, they said the core holding was that the Second Amendment is for the purpose of self-defense. And they went through 8 pages of defining the term bear. And even though the Heller facts only spoke to whether he could have a gun inside his home, and specifically a handgun, they allowed long guns. And they rejected that argument, saying you can't just throw out one class of guns and say, there, your rights are protected. But they also went through 8 pages of defining the word bear historically and concluded that to bear means to carry. And then in McDonald, they said, hey, the states have to comply with this. So what other courts, and it's interesting that you brought up the purposes, what other courts, particularly out of the Fourth Circuit, the lower courts in the Fourth Circuit, are saying is, how are we supposed to exercise these purposes that the Second Amendment is supposed to protect, such as hunting, such as self-defense, such as militia training, inside our homes? So they are holding pretty squarely and in line with what Heller said, that the Second Amendment extends beyond the threshold of one's front door.
Ryan in Honolulu says, why are the panel members focusing on the firearm instead of the person using the firearm? That's the problem. If the person holding the firearm is mentally impaired in some way, shape, or form, we had 4 mental health folks here last week. They are very, very worried about people beginning to stigmatize mentally impaired folks, because most folks with mental problems are not dangerous at all, that they're not violent, but and that the stigma will result in even some of them covering up, not admitting their problems because they will be hurt by them. And this whole business that the emphasis should be on the mentally ill rather than on our surplus of guns in the country. Where do you stand on that?
I wish we had a nice, simple answer like that. Well, gee, it's the mentally ill, so therefore, we do a litmus test, find the mentally ill, and they don't have any guns. Well, the difficulty is that in the research that we have, and in this area it's fairly decent, person with mental illness, and that's across the board, person with mental illness is no more likely to commit an act of violence, a homicide especially, but act of violence in the generic sense, than their counterpart who is non-mentally ill.
Richard.
Except if they are mentally ill and they also are a substance abuser, then their rate increases almost 50%.
If I showed you a person who I think seems to me kind of funny, could you be able to look at that person and study them and ask them questions and be able to say, this person should not have a weapon?
If I had enough time and I had enough data, yes, I could, sure. That's what we have to do as part of our examinations of these patients.
Our friend Byron Uesugi was basically given a clear bill of health despite the fact that he had already been violent in an elevator and kicked it in. He had access to innumerable weapons. I mean, the cache was something like 15 of them, and the most convenient one for him to kill people with was the small one that you couldn't see and had an illegal clip of 17 bullets in each one.
Was it a Glock? I don't remember that. Exactly what it was.
I think it was a Glock, but I'm not sure. I think it was a Glock, and he had a 17 round clip, and during the process of slaughtering 7 people, he successfully jammed it at one point, dropped that clip out, and then slammed another one in, and then slammed the third one in when it was time for him to do so. And the only reason he didn't shoot him more was because that thing basically blocked, and three cartridges were left unused. And he walked around and shot everybody. And the key to that was it was concealed. The key to that, it was small and easily weldable. It could be he could stand over people and not have to do anything to keep on shooting them. And so nobody is going to tell me that if that guy had gone in there with a knife that he would have been successful. Nobody's going to tell me if people had seen him coming with that they wouldn't have raised an alarm and people could have at least closed doors and tried to keep him out, or at least have access to calling the police quicker, although the police did arrive quickly at that particular point. So you're telling me that, and I will guarantee you that there was 2 different psychiatric or mental institutions in hospitals that released him and said that he's no imminent threat to anyone. Period.
Well, aren't we pointing out deficiencies in the mental health system?
Yes and no. What we're pointing out are the deficiencies in human behavior when it comes especially to something like violence. Our ability to predict suicide is relatively good because you have a particular emotional state, psychological state, and you have a somewhat more fixed environment that you can be aware of. With violence, you have the person in their particular point in life that we don't know about necessarily, and you have all the other things that surround it, such as somebody who just ticks them off in the car as they drive by, or somebody who does this or that, or some other thing that occurs uniquely for that individual. So the ability to know all of those variables is well beyond the capability of whatever government or other agency that there is. There is no way to have all of that information that would say, okay, at this point in time, this person is going to do this or that. You can say, generally, perhaps, okay, this person is more likely to, but imminent danger is the standard. Imminent danger means just about right now. If it's 3 weeks from now, a month from now, that's not imminent.
And all of these things assume that you've got somebody who owns a gun who's responsible, okay? How many people out there are alcoholics, just out of curiosity? How many of them have problems with essentially drugs as well? How many of them are exhausted from their work? How many of them are angry at their wife because they think they're cheating on them? How many of them are angry at their kids for being up all night and keeping them awake? All of these things suggest that that person's going to behave rationally. You've got a gun in that house. You've got somebody who's high on alcohol. You've got a football player who's mad at his wife, ends up killing her and then shooting himself in the head. I mean, where is this theory that Americans are so absolutely pure in their behaviors that they're going to be responsible with guns? I don't get it.
Should we have Nerf blade butcher knives?
We should certainly have, I would say that I have never known anybody who has done a real good job of slaughtering a lot of people with a very, very violent weapon in their presence, and that's called a knife, okay? Right. You have a knife. I've never seen anybody chase around 27 or 28 people and kill them with a knife. Okay? 1, it's harder to do. 2, somebody is going to have the ability to do something about it. And 3, you can't run away from a bullet. You can run away from a knife very easily.
And that brings up to the question I was going to pose to you. How many people would have died in this tragic shooting you were describing had one responsible law-abiding citizen had a concealed and carry? The guy pulls out and starts shooting, he shoots the killer.
This goes on, it happens so quickly, you're right, that's complete speculation. I have no idea whether they would have succeeded in shooting the guy. I have no idea whether they would have had access to the gun, whether they carried around with him all day long at the Xerox building. Somehow I don't think Xerox supervisors would be wildly happy about that. I know they wouldn't have been happy to have Uesugi carrying his one around, and the only time he did was when he planned it, brought it in and had it concealed, and had exactly the right gun to kill as many people as he could. And it was a nice, purely available gun.
I think the rest of us can go home. Don calls, and he says, I just retired as the head of the UH campus security, and Peter Carlisle's the only person who knows what he's talking about. Keep it up. Let's go, you guys. We're out of here. Just leave him here. He's the plant.
The check's in the mail. Thank you.
Neil wants to know, why can't we not stand on our ground? Why can we not stand our ground in our own homes? Why should we have to hide and lock ourselves away in our own homes? Meaning, I think he's saying you don't have to.
We have a castle doctrine that was passed just last legislature that does not force you to evacuate your home because someone's breaking in to commit a felony.
That's a state law.
That's a state law.
And the Heller decision.
Heller specifically says that you can have a firearm inside your home. So you do not have to run from your home.
To legally own a handgun in Hawaii, you need to take a firearms training course, right?
That is not correct.
Not correct.
In 1994, they passed the Long Gun Registration Act. Prior to that, long guns were not registered. and it did not require registration of previously owned firearms prior to 1994.
42 states are shall issue. Do you understand that phrase? What does that phrase mean?
Okay.
For concealed carry.
If you are qualified and meet the specifications, then the official who is in charge of giving you a concealed and carry license does not have a choice but to issue you a license. Other states, and more recently, are constitutional carry states, where you are assumed to be permitted to carry. And then there are states like Hawaii who have a licensing statute, and they give the chief of police complete discretion to make the decision as to whether to let you carry, and what that is, in effect, is a ban.
Called may issue.
May issue.
May issue.
But I've known guys who've gotten them.
Where?
In Hawaii.
When can they be deposed?
Yeah, we would love to talk to them.
I can remember very.
Peter,
I better not say this on the air.
Have you ever had a concealed carry?
No, never
permit?
asked for one.
No.
Have you ever had the sheriff issue one, especially?
For me, no.
Yeah. Do you know people who have?
I am aware of instances where they were temporarily given to people who had exceptional circumstances involving people targeting them.
These were government officials?
I remember a politician getting one who was running for office, being able to get one.
But that was, no, these were civilians. I mean, it wasn't a government person who was getting it. But yeah, that actually has occurred, but very rarely. If you're saying this is something that happens regularly,
No, I'm not saying
absolutely
that.
not.
I was just asking a question.
Yeah.
All right, anyway, what this bill says, 42 states are shall issue for concealed carry, and all of them, there has never been the feared, what I fear, blood in the streets scenario. Are Hawaii residents any less safe or capable? I think that's a rhetorical question. Carlisle, your thoughts on the Supreme Court ruling stating that police are no longer obligated to be put in harm's way of a person who is armed. Forrest in Honolulu.
Well, the answer is that the police can take reasonable action to defend themselves and protect themselves. That's completely correct. But do they have an obligation and a sworn oath as a police officer to respond to crime scenes and to protect the public? Absolutely, unequivocally. And in fact, when police officers are at a crime scene and they are there handling it with somebody who is armed and dangerous, then they have a police duty to respond to that situation and to make it safe for everybody who is in that area. They cannot walk away from that as a police officer.
Bob, and why? Oh, I'm sorry.
One second.
Sure.
Castle Rock versus Gonzalez, Supreme Court decision, that the police, I'll read, the Supreme Court found that the police do not have a duty to protect you.
192 U.S. No, just kidding.
That's what we were addressing earlier. Do not have a duty to protect you. And that's why I brought up you can't sue them because they have no duty to protect you. So why can't we protect ourselves?
The idea that the police don't protect us is nonsensical. You're talking about whether they can sue you or not.
Why is there a crime? If they protect us, why are there personal violent crimes in Hawaii?
There are personal violent crimes in Hawaii because there are criminals.
Agreed. And if those people had the ability to protect themselves, would there have been as many violent crimes? Clearly not, when you look at the national statistics.
I don't think I'm buying into that, okay?
Look at the national stats.
I don't think that that's correct.
There is not any agreement on that in terms of the research. It's not to say it's not true, but it's not to say that it's true. There is just too much difference and the need for further focused research on it to get the answers to that. I can't give you that answer. However,
Can we look at Washington, D.C. for a second, which has massive violent crime, massive murder rate, no guns.
Right.
Right across the river, Arlington, much relaxed gun laws and a tiny violent crime
Is
rate.
there a slight difference in
the
those two
population?
areas? One population to the people who are there and basically the backgrounds of those people? Am I missing something there?
Yeah.
The ghettoization.
Would you sit there and say,
no question that there are differences in the population. They're that far apart.
Well, that's perfectly true, and which is one of the reasons why small firearms are so dangerous in some place that's tightly packed together. I mean, seriously, you're a whole lot better off with somebody shooting a gun foolishly in Waianae out in the country than you are when they're doing it right in the middle of downtown Honolulu. So yes, but are they the same place or the same location? Is it the same demographics? Is it the same situation? No, and to use that as an example is pretty much nonsensical.
Harvey, I have another question for you. This person wants to know, does the NRA get any money from the gun manufacturers? Get a lot of money from gun manufacturers, right?
I don't know that for a fact. I would assume that many of the gun manufacturers advertise obviously in the NRA publication. So the answer would be yes.
And they put a lot of PAC money together to support candidates who oppose to any regulations.
They being the manufacturers?
Yes.
I would assume that they put PAC money up, yes.
I have another question, okay, and that is this, and it's straightforward. There's this wonderful weapon called a sniper rifle that's 50 caliber, and you know it. I'm sure you're aware of it. So, and as a matter of fact, it's one of these things that can shoot 4 miles and explode into whatever it hits and devastate it, correct?
I would question the
and
4 miles. It shoots a long way.
It shoots over the horizon, and it's also can actually knock out or put a very large and impressive hole in a low-flying airplane. Is that correct?
How many rounds in a machine gun would it take on average to hit an airplane?
I have no idea.
400 to 500.
Okay, well, this is a gun
to hit once in an airplane. 400 to 500 to hit once in an airplane.
So now the sniper rifle. Are you talking about low-flying airplanes like that are coming into land?
Any airplanes.
Well,
in
any
war,
airplane could be 30,000 feet in the air, and you can shoot it at the
We're talking about in war with a machine gunner shooting a 50 cal machine gun on full auto.
Okay, but those are things you're charging
into.
I'm talking about some little piper that's going at 120 miles an hour and is about to land.
Ridiculous concept. It's never happened. Where's there been a crime with a 50 cal, Peter? There's never been a crime.
If that's what it can do, why should anybody own that gun? And the NRA has said that absolutely and unequivocally, we can all have one of those things in our home. Why?
Where's the crime with a 50? Show me one crime with a 50. None. Zero.
Excuse me. Okay, let's say we give it to... So you would actually advocate for everybody in Honolulu who wants one to have a 50 caliber sniper rifle. That's
anybody that can afford one and can get a permit
has the right to have
should be able to have a 50. They're used for target practice.
They're used by the Honolulu Police Department for one reason, and that's to shoot out an engine block, and that's the only reason that they use it for. And to suggest that somebody who is a gun collector or somebody who's a 4-year-old who can get their hand on one of these things like you used to be able to do, to take it around to school and to show it to the fellow kids, that's nuts.
That was a nasty thing.
That's nuts. Of course it was a nasty thing.
In California, when I was 4 years, fourth grade, that was a nasty thing.
I can't imagine somebody doing that. I mean, I can't imagine it,
And it was commonplace.
Harvey, I don't know gun gauges and stuff very well.
It's big.
I always get confused at such a thing. But I do know politics a little bit, politically, the NRA has done a brilliant job in over the years, and we're not going to pass anything to ban semi-automatic rifles. We're not going to ban the bans on ammunition. Probably not either. But it seems to me, and I'm only talking politics now, if the National Rifle Association and the people who support it, the politicians who support it so strongly, don't take a more conciliatory and compromised point of view on some of these things, ultimately they're going to look increasingly ridiculous. And over the long haul, I think what Obama and Biden and Mayor Bloomberg seem to be saying, and the Gifford, is that they're in it for the long haul to try to do exactly what the National Rifle Association has done. Namely, Mayor Bloomberg has $25 billion, and he's going to put money into trying to defeat people who are essentially so strongly one-issue people on guns. And we're going to see a greater limit in the long run, I think, on this if the politics are wrong by the NRA. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm not trying to ban all weapons. I'm only saying that there's got to be some compromise somewhere on the NRA's part, and I don't see it in any. And I'm looking at you. I don't know.
Well, we don't feel it's a gun issue. Now that's probably gonna raise the hackles on Peter's neck, but we don't think it's a gun issue. We do feel that it's a mental health issue, that there are guns in the hands of people that probably shouldn't have them or absolutely shouldn't have them. In the case of Sandy Hook, You know, so the mechanisms, we're all for mechanisms that will keep guns out of hands of people that shouldn't have guns in their hands. We are not for gun bans. Gun bans don't work. I can give you a list a mile long of gun bans that don't work, and they don't work to the extreme. If you look at Germany and you look at the Soviet Union in 1929, bans guns. So now nobody's got guns to defend themselves, and 20 million dissidents were killed by the government. Let's take Turkey, 1911. From 1915 to 1970, 1.5 million Armenians were slaughtered right after the guns were banned. You know, I can give you lots of them. Germany.
But is it just the guns that protect the rights of Americans?
No, it's not just the guns. It's the Constitution, it's our legal system, it's our police department, it's our military, and it is clearly our rights to defend ourselves with the Second Amendment. That is a huge factor in American history, and it should stay a huge factor.
Ultimately, what
I know a little American history.
Good man.
Ultimately,
Spent my life teaching.
what I heard you asking was, at what point does a certain gun restriction or gun control become reasonable? And what I believe is that that's already built into the law. And Heller and McDonald, legally speaking, although the wheels of justice move at a glacial pace, are relatively new laws. And the levels of scrutiny that courts are going to use to evaluate whether or not a gun restriction or some sort of gun regulation passes constitutional muster already has some of those types of analysis built in. So the first thing you ask is this a type of protected weapon? I don't know enough about the classes of guns to answer Peter's 50 caliber sniper question. But assuming that it is, a level of scrutiny is going to apply that the courts are going to use in their test. And it is going to have in there, you may pass this regulation if, for example, it is rationally based on what you're trying to do, or if there is a compelling government interest. So all of these types of reasonableness and the analysis is already built in. Now, granted, they're open to some judicial interpretation. But ultimately, I mean, we can sit and debate policy and we don't think this is right, but ultimately the law is going to make these determinations. It's just going to take a while to do it. And what I'm suggesting is that a lot of these types of questions are already going to built in just by design of the existing law that we do have in other matters.
We're down to 3 minutes. You get one more shot at this. What of the suggested proposals that Obama has come up with do you find attractive and do you think could pass?
Well, the proposals for what
well, let's take
executive order proposals or the laws?
That's all he can probably get away with. That's the only thing that'll probably...
Well, executive orders, you know, I do think that people who are actively mentally ill should be among the group that should be screened at that point. And in our law, it says that as long as they are certified not to be affected by the mental illness at a particular point in time, that at that point they can. So the mentally ill, actively mentally ill, yeah. The things that we know are somebody with a history of violence, especially in terms of as an adult, you want to remove those people. The person who, well, the ability to, again, in the Obama grouping, and I'm going away from that, in the Obama grouping, the research component,
Center for Disease Control.
The Center for Disease Control, and he actually was broader than that. They just are the primary grouping. Definitely want to see that because that'll give us some answers as to these other questions.
No, the lawyers particularly, I like to give only 10 seconds to. What should we?
I want to make something real clear. In the laws that are coming up here, in the ban laws, the ones that are in the federal level and in the Hawaii level, they talk about assault weapons. Fictitious term, it doesn't describe anything in reality. An assault rifle is an intermediate caliber rifle capable of select fire, so either single or full auto. What they're talking about, assault weapons. None of these things that are being talked about are assault weapons. They're completely semi-auto. We have no full auto in this state, and an assault weapon is full auto.
You know what that man up there just did?
No.
He did like that so that the lawyers don't get to have any time. That makes me
sorry.
feel so good. I love it when the lawyers get stuff.
And I was going to be conciliatory.
I was thinking my wife would call in and rebuttal to Peter's fan. She left me hanging out to dry.
Thanks, Harvey. Thanks, Richard. Right. Thanks, Dick. Thanks, Peter. Good to have you back again. Next week, we'll feature another pressing issue facing our newly elected Congress, our nation's financial crisis. Lawmakers recently took compromise measures to address major federal budget issues. We'll discuss the state initiatives that could be affected, as well as plans to address state government spending and encourage revenue growth. Join U.S. Congresswoman Colleen Hanabusa, State Senator Sam Sloan, State Budget Director Calbert Young, and UHERO economist Carl Bonham as we explore how the federal fiscal cliff and the debt ceiling crisis are likely to impact Hawaii's economy. That's next time on Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Dan Boylan. A hui ho.